The event unfolded in eerie silence. Observatories across Earth reported the sudden flash, a brilliant flare that erupted on the moon's surface without warning. The brightness lingered for several seconds, casting sharp shadows across lunar craters before dissipating, leaving a haunting ashen plume in its wake. No one had seen it coming. No asteroid warning systems had detected an object large enough to cause such a profound disturbance. To the teams at NASA, it was an enigma, a violent impact that should have been impossible to miss. In the following hours, telescopes zoomed in, capturing the details of the aftermath. A massive crater, far larger than any recent natural occurrence, marred the moon's surface. At the center of the impact was an unnatural structure, a jagged, dark scar that looked less like a crater and more like a wound. Analysts fed the data into their models, searching for answers. When the results came back, they raised more questions than they answered. The spectrometer readings were wrong. No ordinary asteroid carried material with these properties. What little data they could extract suggested something alien, something far beyond Earth's understanding of matter. The decision to send a mission was not made lightly. With the world watching, NASA cobbled together a plan, the urgency of the situation leaving no room for delay. The Artemis 3 mission, originally scheduled to establish the foundation of a lunar colony, was repurposed overnight. Its crew, Commander Elaine Hart, Dr. Malik Yates, Lieutenant Connor Reed, and Private Alina Vega, had been training for months, their expertise spanning engineering, biology, and lunar excavation. They were chosen not only for their skill, but for their ability to handle the unknown. Now they were heading directly into the mystery. The landing was uneventful at first. Their shuttle descended onto the moon's gray, dusty surface, settling a safe distance from the crater's edge. As the engines cooled, the astronauts activated their suits, running final checks before venturing outside. When the airlock hissed open, they stepped into a landscape transformed. The familiar desolation of the moon was interrupted by a scene of violent upheaval. A fine mist of dust hung in the air, glowing faintly in the sunlight, and sharp, crystalline fragments littered the ground. Elaine's voice crackled over the comms. "Stay alert. Malik, get those samples. Connor, map the area. Vega, you're with me. Let's get eyes on that hole." The team worked methodically, but unease simmered beneath their professionalism. Malik crouched near a chunk of crystallized debris, running his scanner across its surface. The readings made him frown. "Commander, this isn't lunar rock. It's organic, at least partially." Elaine's voice hardened. "Define organic." "It's hard to say. The composition isn't familiar. Carbon-based, but there's something else, something reactive." Connor's voice broke in. "You might want to see this." The rest of the team joined him near the edge of the crater. The jagged opening loomed before them, a yawning abyss that seemed to devour light. Even with their high-powered lamps, the bottom was invisible, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Strange patterns lined the edges of the hole, grooves and ridges that looked almost deliberate, like the work of a sculptor with an alien hand. "This isn't just a crater," Alina said, her voice hushed. "It's a tunnel." "Possibly a series of tunnels," Malik added, his eyes fixed on the intricate patterns. "Look at the symmetry. This wasn't created by the impact. It was exposed by it. Elaine stared into the void, her instincts screaming at her to leave. But the mission came first. "We've got to go down," she said, her tone resolute. "Connor, secure the ropes. We'll descend in pairs." The first descent was slow, the team's suits humming as they adjusted to the deeper pressure. The walls of the tunnel were unnervingly smooth, almost metallic in some places. Strange markings appeared the further they went, glowing faintly under their helmet lights. Lines and curves that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Does anyone else feel that?" Alina asked suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Feel what?" Elaine replied, her voice clipped. "I don't know. Like vibrations. Subtle, but there." Malik nodded. "I feel it too, a low-frequency hum. Could be the equipment. Or something else," Connor muttered, his hand tightening on the grip of his tool. After what felt like hours, the team reached a landing, a flat, wide expanse where the tunnel branched into multiple directions. The air was heavier here, tinged with a metallic taste that clung to their tongues even through the filters of their helmets. Elaine raised a hand, signaling for silence. The team froze, the only sounds their own breathing and the soft crackle of static over the comms. Then they heard it, a distant noise, faint but distinct. It wasn't mechanical, nor was it the echo of their own movements. It was organic, a scraping, clicking sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The team exchanged uneasy glances. "We need to document this and get out," Elaine said firmly. "Vega, mark the coordinates. Malik, collect samples from that growth on the wall." As Malik approached the wall, his gloved hand hovered over a cluster of strange, bulbous protrusions. They pulsed faintly, almost as if alive. His scanner whirred, feeding data back to his HUD. "Commander, this is incredible. These structures, they're cellular, not just organic. They're alive." Before Elaine could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the tunnel walls seemed to expand and contract, like the ribcage of a breathing giant. The scraping sound grew louder, joined by a guttural, resonant vibration that made their bones ache. "We're not alone," Connor whispered. Elaine's voice cut through the growing panic. "Move! Back to the surface! Now!" The team turned, their lights cutting through the darkness as the vibrations grew into a deafening roar. Something was moving in the shadows, faster than their eyes could track. As they scrambled for the ropes, a chilling realization settled over them. Whatever had struck the moon hadn't just exposed the tunnels, it had woken something up. The tunnels stretched endlessly, a maze of alien architecture that seemed to defy logic. The walls pulsed faintly, their texture unlike anything the team had encountered before. Smooth and cool to the touch, they appeared organic, almost flesh-like, with faint ridges that undulated subtly as if alive. The sensation unnerved them, but Commander Hart pressed on, her determination masking the growing dread that gnawed at her resolve. The air grew thicker the deeper they descended. Their suit filters struggled to keep up, their HUDs flashing warnings about rising humidity and unidentified particulates. The silence of the lunar surface had been replaced by an oppressive hum, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It wasn't constant, it came in waves like a heartbeat, growing stronger with every step they took. Dr. Yates paused to examine a patch of the strange wall. "This isn't just stone," he said, running his scanner over the surface. "There are organic compounds woven into the structure. It's some kind of biomineral composite. This whole place, these tunnels, they're alive in a way." Alina Vega shivered, her voice tight. "Alive? Like it's growing?" "Not exactly," Yates replied, his gaze fixed on the shifting patterns beneath the surface. "More like it was grown, cultivated for a purpose. But by who or what is anyone's guess." Elaine's voice cut through the tension. "We'll have time for theories later. Right now, we need to find the source of that signal and get out. Move." As they pressed forward, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, so massive that their lights barely reached the far walls. The floor was uneven, littered with jagged protrusions that glowed faintly, casting an eerie bioluminescent light. In the center of the cavern lay a monolithic structure, a dark, chitinous mass that pulsed rhythmically, as though it were breathing. Veins of an iridescent liquid snaked across its surface, feeding into the walls of the cavern. The team approached cautiously, their movements slow and deliberate. Malik's scanner beeped frantically, struggling to process the data. This thing, whatever it is, it's emitting energy. Low-level electromagnetic waves similar to brain activity. "It's alive, Commander." Elaine stared at the structure, unease creeping into her expression. "If it's alive, then where's the rest of it? Structures like this don't exist in isolation. There's always a system, a network." Connor Reed, ever the skeptic, gripped his weapon tightly. "Or a predator." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The faint hum that had accompanied them through the tunnels erupted into a deep, guttural vibration that resonated in their bones. The Katina's structure shuddered violently, cracks spreading across its surface as something inside began to stir. A moment later, it split open. The noise was deafening, a wet, tearing sound that sent a wave of revulsion through the team. From within the structure emerged a creature unlike anything they had imagined. Its body was elongated and skeletal, its limbs impossibly thin, yet clearly strong. Shimmering, translucent flesh stretched taut over its frame, revealing pulsating organs and veins filled with the same iridescent liquid. Its head was a nightmare, a grotesque amalgamation of mandibles, glistening fangs, and multifaceted eyes that reflected their lights in a kaleidoscope of colors. For a moment, the creature was still, its body twitching as if testing its own movements. Then it turned its head, locking its gaze on the team. A sound emanated from deep within its throat, a clicking, chittering noise that seemed to ripple through the cavern. The creature moved with horrifying speed, its spindly limbs carrying it across the floor in a blur. "Run!" Elaine shouted, raising her weapon and firing. The sharp crack of her gunfire echoed in the cavern, but the creature barely flinched. The bullets struck its translucent flesh, passing through with no visible effect. Instead, the wounds sealed almost instantly, the shimmering liquid inside its body coagulating into new tissue. Malik wasn't fast enough. The creature lashed out with one of its appendages, the limb striking him like a whip. His scream was cut short as the appendage pierced his suit and embedded itself into his torso. The others watched in horror as his body convulsed, the creature lifting him effortlessly. His helmet cracked and the alien atmosphere rushed in. His exposed skin began to bubble and melt, the liquid inside the creature's veins spilling onto him, dissolving flesh and bone alike. Within seconds, Malik Yates was gone, a twisted, liquefied mass crumpled on the floor. "Move! Go now!" Elaine bellowed, her voice breaking with desperation. The team bolted, their boots pounding against the uneven ground. Behind them, the creature let out a guttural roar, its cry reverberating through the cavern. The walls seemed to respond, the faint bioluminescence intensifying as the tunnels came alive. More sounds joined the first, a chorus of clicks and growls that grew louder with every step. "It's not alone," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. "There's more of them." Connor glanced over his shoulder, his face pale. "Great. Now what?" "Keep running," Elaine barked. "Head for the surface." The tunnels twisted and turned, their path illuminated only by the erratic beams of their helmet lights. The sounds of pursuit were relentless, skittering claws, chittering voices, and the occasional deafening roar that sent shivers down their spines. The creatures weren't just following. They were hunting, driving the team deeper into the labyrinth. As they ran, the walls began to shift. Veins of iridescent liquid pulsed faster, and the ridges that lined the tunnels seemed to grow, reaching out like grasping fingers. The air thickened further, making every breath a struggle. They burst into another chamber, smaller but equally unsettling. The walls were covered in a viscous black substance that dripped onto the floor in slow, deliberate streams. At the center of the room was another structure, smaller than the first, but equally alien. It pulsed faintly, its surface writhing as though something inside was trying to break free. "We can't keep going like this," Connor said, his voice ragged. "We're sitting ducks." Elaine scanned the room, her mind racing. "We don't have a choice. We stick together, we keep moving, and we survive. That's an order." The sounds of the creatures grew louder, their chittering cries echoing through the tunnels. They were close now, too close. Elaine gritted her teeth, gripping her weapon tightly. For the first time, she felt the cold sting of fear. Whatever they had awakened in the depths of the moon, it was ancient, it was hungry, and it wasn't going to let them leave. The echoes of their panicked breaths filled the tunnels, mingling with the relentless skittering of claws against the smooth, undulating walls. The creatures were close, their chittering cries bouncing off the organic surfaces, creating a cacophony of sound that was impossible to pinpoint. Every turn of the labyrinth seemed to lead them deeper, every junction more alien and hostile than the last. Elaine led the way, her weapon drawn, though she knew its effectiveness was minimal at best. Her suit's external lights cast long, flickering shadows that danced across the walls, illusions that teased the edge of her fraying nerves. Behind her, Connor grunted as he pushed forward, his oxygen intake alarm beeping faintly. Alina stumbled, her hand brushing against a fleshy ridge on the wall, only to recoil as the surface pulsed under her touch like living skin. "This place is a death trap," Connor hissed, gripping his makeshift weapon, a shard of crystalline debris. "We need to find a way out before they box us in." Elaine ignored him, scanning the passage ahead. The tunnel widened slightly, offering a temporary reprieve from the suffocating closeness. But the hum that permeated the air was louder now, more insistent, as if the moon itself was warning them to leave, or luring them further in. "They're hurting us," Alina said suddenly, her voice trembling. "Like prey, they're driving us somewhere." Elaine turned to her, her jaw tight. "Then we find a way to turn this around. We don't stop. We don't split up. Got it?" A piercing screech erupted behind them, cutting through the oppressive hum. The sound was guttural and feral, filled with a malicious intelligence that made Elaine's stomach twist. She gestured sharply, and the group broke into a sprint, their boots slipping on the uneven, organic floor. The tunnel's ridges began to narrow again, forcing them into single file. Connor stumbled, cursing as his foot snagged on a sinewy growth that seemed to move of its own accord. He yanked his leg free, but not before the growth coiled briefly around his ankle, leaving a faint, burning welt through the material of his suit. "They're in the walls," he gasped, limping as he caught up to the others. "The whole damn place is alive." Elaine didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, calculating their chances, searching for any semblance of a plan. But the truth loomed like a shadow over her thoughts. They were running out of time. The tunnel opened abruptly into a cavern, smaller than the ones before, but no less unsettling. The walls were slick with a dark, viscous substance that oozed down in slow, deliberate rivulets, pooling at their feet. Bioluminescent veins snaked through the liquid, casting an eerie glow that revealed their surroundings. At the center of the chamber stood one of the creatures, its spindly limbs splayed in a grotesque display of dominance. Its translucent skin shimmered in the dim light, revealing the throbbing organs beneath, a grotesque fusion of biological and alien design. Its head turned toward them, its multifaceted eyes catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 colors. The creature let out a low, clicking growl, its limbs tensing as it prepared to strike. Elaine raised her weapon and fired, the sharp crack of the shot echoing through the chamber. The bullet struck the creature's torso, passing through its flesh with a wet splatter. But just as before, the wound sealed almost instantly, the iridescent liquid coagulating into new tissue. The creature screeched, its body contorting unnaturally as it charged. "Move!" Elaine shouted, shoving Alina toward the far end of the chamber. Connor gripped his crystalline weapon and swung as the creature lunged at him. The shard caught its arm, slicing through the translucent flesh and severing one of its appendages. The creature recoiled with a deafening screech, black fluid spraying from the wound. For a brief moment it hesitated, its multifaceted eyes flickering with a strange, calculated malice. Connor didn't wait for it to recover. "Go! I'll hold it off." Elaine grabbed his arm. "No! We stay together!" Another screech erupted from the tunnel behind them. More creatures were coming, dozens of them, their clicking cries creating a deafening chorus. "There's no time!" Connor roared, wrenching free of her grip. "Get them out of here, Elaine. Go!" Before she could argue, the creature lunged again, and Connor met it head-on, plunging the shard into its chest. The alien liquid sprayed across his suit, hissing and bubbling as it began to eat through the material. His screams echoed as Elaine dragged a sobbing Alina toward the far tunnel. The next stretch of the labyrinth was a blur of panic and exhaustion. Elaine and Alina ran without looking back, the sounds of the hunt following them like a shadow. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the veins of liquid pulsing faster as if feeding on their terror. The tunnels twisted and branched unpredictably, each turn a gamble, each choice a potential dead end. Finally, they stumbled into another chamber, smaller and more claustrophobic than the last. The walls were covered in a thick, web-like substance that glowed faintly, casting the room in a sickly green light. At the center was a small, alien structure, an obelisk-like pillar covered in shifting glyphs that seemed to move under their gaze. Alina collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. "We can't keep going. They'll find us. Elaine knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "We're not dead yet. Look at me, Vega. We've gotten this far. We're going to survive." But even as she spoke, Elaine's own resolve wavered. The hum in the air had become a roar, the walls vibrating with a pulse that matched her racing heart. The glyphs on the obelisk shifted more rapidly, their patterns hypnotic and menacing. Then the chittering started again, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of claws scraping against the tunnel floor. The creatures were near, and this time there was no way out. Elaine stood, her weapon raised, her body trembling with exhaustion and defiance. If this was the end, she was going to make it count. But as the first shadow appeared in the tunnel, something in the chamber changed. The obelisk's glow intensified, its glyphs spinning faster and faster until the entire room was bathed in blinding light. Elaine shielded her eyes, her breath caught in her throat. Whatever was happening, it wasn't her doing. The hunt was far from over. But for now, the moon itself seemed to be shifting the rules. The chamber pulsed with an otherworldly light, the glyphs on the obelisk spinning so fast they seemed to blur together into one continuous, shifting glow. Elaine staggered back, her weapon slack in her hands. Alina crouched against the wall, shielding her face from the blinding radiance. For a moment, the creatures froze at the edge of the chamber, their chittering silenced. Their multifaceted eyes reflected the light, and their bodies trembled as if in fear or reverence. The obelisk emitted a sound, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through Elaine's chest. It wasn't just noise, it was a presence, something vast and ancient, pressing against her mind. She felt it in her thoughts, in the marrow of her bones. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but it carried meaning, urgency, desperation, and a warning laced with incomprehensible sorrow. "Elaine," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What is this?" "I don't know," Elaine replied, her words catching in her throat. "But whatever it is, it's keeping them back. Stay close to me." The creatures hesitated, their grotesque forms crouching low, their limbs twitching as though torn between hunger and terror. But the respite didn't last. One of the creatures, a larger, more massive form with spiked appendages and a glowing, segmented thorax, let out a screech that shattered the fragile moment. It charged, slamming into the chamber, its claws digging into the floor as it advanced toward the two survivors. The obelisk's glow flared, sending a shockwave through the room. The creature faltered but didn't stop. Its resilience set off a chain reaction. The others behind it surged forward, their hesitation gone, their hunger overwhelming whatever instinct had held them at bay. "Run!" Elaine shouted, grabbing Alina by the arm and pulling her toward the far side of the chamber. A tunnel branched off, narrower than the others, barely wide enough for a single person. It wasn't an escape route, it was a gamble, but it was all they had. The walls of the narrow passage pulsed violently as if rejecting their presence. Elaine's shoulder scraped against a jagged outgrowth, tearing her suit. She cursed, feeling the searing sting of the alien air against her skin. Behind her, the creatures poured into the tunnel, their screeches reverberating like a storm of knives. The narrow passage slowed them, forcing them to crawl and contort, but they didn't stop. They never stopped. Alina's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled forward. "We're not going to make it. They're too fast." "Keep moving," Elaine barked. Her own lungs burned, every step a battle against exhaustion and despair. "We don't stop until we're out." The tunnel twisted sharply, and then they saw it, a faint, silvery light ahead. The surface, salvation. Elaine's heart surged with a desperate hope she hadn't felt in hours. "We're almost there," she yelled, her voice cracking. But the creatures were closing the gap. Their clicking mandibles and guttural growls grew louder, the vibrations of their pursuit shaking the tunnel around them. One of them lunged forward, its clawed appendage catching Alina's ankle and dragging her down. She screamed, her nails clawing at the ground as the creature began to pull her back. "No!" Elaine spun, firing her last few rounds. The bullets struck the creature's limb, severing it with a sickening crunch. Alina scrambled forward, sobbing, her suit torn and blood streaking her leg. The light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter, blinding in its intensity. The tunnel widened into an opening, and the two survivors burst onto the lunar surface. The cold, desolate expanse stretched before them, a stark contrast to the living nightmare they had just escaped. Their shuttle sat in the distance, its landing lights flickering like a beacon of hope. But the creatures weren't finished. They poured from the tunnel, a writhing mass of limbs and fangs, their screeches cutting through the thin lunar atmosphere. Elaine grabbed Alina, half dragging her across the uneven ground toward the shuttle. The ground beneath them trembled violently. The moon itself seemed to rebel against the intrusion. Cracks spidered out from the tunnel's opening, and a deafening roar erupted from deep within the moon. The creatures froze for a moment, their bodies trembling, before resuming their pursuit with renewed ferocity. The shuttle's ramp descended as they approached, the autopilot responding to Elaine's frantic signal. She shoved Alina inside, turning to fire her flare gun at the nearest creature. The flare struck its chest, igniting the translucent flesh in a burst of green fire. The creature let out a high-pitched scream, thrashing wildly as its body crumpled to the ground. But there were too many, and they were closing fast. Elaine leapt onto the ramp, slamming the control panel. The ramp began to rise, the airlock sealing shut, just as the first creature slammed into the side of the shuttle, its claws screeching against the metal. "Launch! Now!" Elaine yelled, collapsing into the pilot's seat. She activated the emergency ascent protocol, her hands trembling as the shuttle's engines roared to life. The shuttle lifted off, the force pinning them to their seats. Through the viewport, Elaine watched as the moon's surface buckled and fractured. Something enormous shifted beneath the crust, a mass of chitin and sinew that stretched for miles, its size dwarfing anything they had encountered in the tunnels. It wasn't just the creatures they had seen. It was all part of a greater entity, an ancient and monstrous intelligence that had lain dormant beneath the moon's surface. As the shuttle ascended, the moon began to collapse inward. The ground caved in, swallowing the creatures and their hive. Dust and debris erupted into space, obscuring the view of the devastation. But even as the moon disintegrated, Elaine couldn't shake the feeling that the entity wasn't gone. It had merely been disturbed, awakened. In the silence of space, Elaine turned to Alina, who was slumped in her seat, her eyes wide and unfocused. Her skin was pale, her veins faintly glowing with an iridescent light. "Alina," Elaine said softly, reaching out to her. But Alina didn't respond. Her lips moved faintly, whispering words that weren't human. Words that resonated with the same hum Elaine had felt in the obelisk chamber. Elaine sank back into her seat, dread washing over her. They had escaped the moon, but whatever had awakened there had followed them home.